Hi, everyone. Thank you for
Hello.
being here. This is Daniel and Annie here. Enrique and Susan, thank you for organizing all this, and Rose behind the scene work there. Stephen, thank you for the introduction. We were so inspired, of course, by Stephen's written words and your drawings and all your projects going back 20 years or further. And it was really great to meet you. And he's been a great supporter throughout, I think, our career, and wrote a foreword for the book that Dan had published. So it's like nice to be connected and have a chance to do this exhibit. I also want to thank Lisa Robertson and Lester Lewis for joining this. I'm so excited. We just met them yesterday, and we were just talking with them how amazing it is to be working together in exhibit, and how much that we love the other artists' work. Sometimes it's not always the case, and it's just like, I feel like there's a lot of common thread between all of our work. So it's so honored to be exhibiting with you. Thank you for being here. And the rest of you participants, I know I don't see you, but I see your names. And so I see a lot of familiar names joining us. So thanks for being here. With that, I try to start. I apologize for any disasters that might happen. I feel like we should all know this, but somehow we can still continue to do that. Let's see if, I have to go back to that. I gotta share the screen. And let's see if it shows. Can everybody see a image? Great.
Thumbs up. Okay, good.
Okay. We thought we'd start a few drawings that are not part of the exhibit, just to kind of explain some of the work that we do and that connects to the exhibit here that we're putting on at the T Space. And these are the drawings that we have been doing over the years. And as Stephen said, I think we're very interested in architecture from a point of view of possibility, whether it's real or it's, it makes sense or not. That architecture without function. And I think it allows us to do a lot of sort of experimental thinking as well as drawings and practices. So as you can see, the first image is kind of the floating concrete column. And then the others are kind of fantasy spaces that we make up, that a giant concrete structure that could sort of levitate in a way, to the invisible structure that makes its presence in the parking lot, and to other things that are combining the landscape, either in despair or at the beginning of a city, as is shown in some of these drawings here. And again, another kind of a thought about possibilities in American parking space that cover most of our landscapes throughout this country. And I think we were also really interested in thinking about architecture as a building atmosphere, instead of kind of making a solid wall structures that it encloses a space. So this is one of our kind of earlier work, thinking about or using the method of building atmosphere. Some of these are the sculpture works that are leading from our LiDAR work to big installation and sculptures.
We're going to reference the word LiDAR, and we'll take just a minute at some point to explain that technology, because it's not everybody knows exactly how it works. So we'll explain that a little bit later. Stephen, this is the piece that you saw under construction at our shop. This is the
right
in Texas. I think you saw us making that big arch there.
Right.
Exactly.
All right, we titled this show Suspended Collapse with the idea that we might share some thoughts and explorations, excuse me, behind recent projects in an effort to understand why so much of our work and structures are neither here nor there, or objects that haven't really arrived yet or are on their way out in some way. We seem to be drawn to the indeterminate and possibly unresolved decisions in the act of construction, and we weren't really clear amongst ourselves as to why. Perhaps arriving at a why would be another form of determinism or of certainty, which we are not. That would seem to contradict our feelings in general. There are two of us, and we have very different ways of engaging and reacting to the events around us. There are always at least two sides, and maybe being reminded of that daily has become a state of being and a way of working. This inconclusiveness is a situation we find ourselves in frequently, and lately it seems like it's a strong parallel current happening in our society, our government, in the arts, and in architecture in general. Meanwhile, the uncertainty of things in general runs counter to everything necessary to produce a building, where decisions must be, by necessity, continually pushed forward, and the continual forking of these decisions and the exclusions cast occlusions on certain other possibilities that might have been. After seeing the results of all that determinism in most of what gets constructed, I think we just became more interested in what might have been rather than what gets built. So back to the title of Suspended Collapse. We almost went with several other titles, but Suspended seemed great since it suggests maybe a reach or a step too far, that is suspended or drawn out over a longer period than usual. This, coupled with collapse, was a way to wrestle with the thought that all human endeavors are somehow on the continuum of returning to Earth, even from the moment the idea comes to mind. But generally, since we are so interested in the gesture of construction, more than its finite completion, we wanted to develop this idea of structures that are temporary in nature, but barely there. Just starting, selectively erased, frail, and maybe quivering at the edge of rationality. There is a lot to explore in this subject category, and much of our work stems from this idea of structures that exist in this world, but only nominally. At T-Space, we were looking mostly at found conditions out in the world. You can see that in the small sculptures and models, the photography, and the LiDAR work. The photographs come from our archive of snapshots going back to the 90s. We still reference these a great deal, and they are a record of our found interest in what is out there when we experience walking around and during specific time frames. These travel snapshots are nothing unusual these days in the area of Instagram, but the photographs are heavily edited and deleted information is used to isolate conditions. We usually present these photographs as 22-inch wide photographic prints on a wall side by side. So here they are on the website as a scroll. And so I think Annie went through several of those
I'll go
earlier.
back a little bit, a few pieces here so you can see.
So these images are basically of things that we find the most interesting out there. And as I mentioned, we come back and edit them. They're of the most flimsy, scrawny conditions found at construction sites. And most of these were taken that we presented here out in the West and in Manhattan. The LiDAR images, on the other hand, are similar in many ways in the sense that they are captures of reality. And the editing takes place also in the computer, but they are spatial rather than a two-dimensional image. I think we had a couple slides there of that LiDAR work getting started. For us, it is a form of photography in the sense of carrying around a heavy piece of equipment, setting up a station, and then capturing the world from various vantage points. And then a lot of the work takes place back in the studio, collectively putting the material back together into 3D models, and a lot of time spent editing.
The last image, this is looking above from Times Square, which we did extensive scanning work in New York.
Some of these are some still images of little vignettes, like this is just a staircase in a building in Soho. This is a parking hut in Lower Manhattan. This is an overlap, like a triple exposure that we taking this data and using it as material. And it is a Roman condition, actually. We spent a year in Rome during 2007, where we first used this LiDAR equipment. So you can kind of see here in this image that it's basically made of millions of small points. These are point measurements taken from a stationary location. A laser is sent out, you get an infrared pulse back, and then the computer records the distance. And it ends up looking a little like a low resolution photograph, and the resolution is just determined by the number of points. you can specify millions or billions. And so what comes back is this incredible world of everything that the device sees. So it's everything that gets attached to buildings and all the parasitic elements that come later after a building's initial idea. And it's these elements that we started to become really interested in from the perspective of what's around us and what makes one place specific from one another. This image is just of a pile of hefty garbage bags in Manhattan, but draped over it with a plastic sheet in the computer modeling. But it gets this ideas of things being sort of wrapped and having a specific form separate from the known entity that they are. Another image, this is from Cortlandt Alley in Lower Manhattan. It's a very complicated piece. That image I was talking about with the pixelated image is the exact same wall, but turned into basically a sheet of paper. We're going to share some videos. We spent 3 months in Manhattan with the Van Allen Institute New York Prize Fellowship as an extension of our LiDAR study, looking at what makes Manhattan unique. And this is from the Bloody Elbow intersection, I think in Helmont area in Manhattan. And again, these are reductive images where we've taken parts of the context out. This is in the Bowery. This animation, we started to look at the things that are not buildings. So the fences, the little temporary construction pieces, stuff built on the roofs, and shadows that are created from the station point of the scanner also became interesting to us.
I think like those earlier photographic images that we were showing, I think LiDAR work demanded a lot of erasure after it was captured because there are a lot of visual debris there. And I think that kind of led us back to photographic work as well. I think whenever we all do that is when we're looking at certain things, when we're taking photographs, there are one or two things that really capture our attention. And so it was kind of a reductive process of taking away everything else, but just kind of focusing on those one or two things that interest you to begin with. And so LiDAR work is very much about that. And these are sort of the video work of those components that we were looking at. This I loved. We were being in Manhattan, and you see that a lot is the steam coming up in the winter time, and that you are able to capture that fleeting moment. And these are earlier work of sculptures, again, kind of going back to the earlier drawings of impossibility in structural work and kind of, architecture without function or architecture of reversing function are the sort of ideas that led to some of these smaller sculptures.
And this notion of fragility in a piece, at like constructing it from the outset and thinking about erasure as a sort of act of demolition as a creative process. And so these are little studies. The size of these pieces are like 30 by 40 inches on a plaster base, and they're usually basswood and plastic and metal, created to think about special conditions and forms that we wouldn't ordinarily do at a larger scale at the outset. So there's studies.
I think after today's opening, if you go to T-Space website, you'll be able to see this particular work and the next one in 3D or 360 view. This is another model of kind of, I think the parts that we talked about with the Lester a little bit with his music too, is that interests us most is the ambiguity between, is it a beginning of a construction or is it the end of construction? And I think the part that really interests me a lot is it sort of lets your mind wonder of possibility, that it's not focused as a single kind of function or purpose, but that you could kind of come up with all different type of ideas about what it could be.
And if we're to accept the idea that no buildings last forever, why not integrate the idea that there's temporality is a part of architecture and construction, that some parts of it could grow and collapse in a much shorter time span than the idea of forever. And so that's some of what these are trying to explore. Okay, I think that's the last slide.
So we'll stop our presentation here so we can participate in other discussions later.
Thank you, Annie and Daniel. It's been really wonderful, a treat working with you both in these last months. Thank you for your amazing, visionary, and inspiring work. I just saw this quote that I really liked, that you had said, Annie. It was in a discussion where it was written that lead pencil studio is after the same result, whether working in fine art or architecture, to draw an emotional response for the viewer. And that, Annie, you said that you like to ask friends about the most meaningful spatial experience that they can describe. Mm-hmm. And you said it takes a while for people to think about that, and then sort of the brief experience that you almost can't describe it. It's like falling in love for the first time. And you said, I feel like if we have enough of that feeling in a spatial experience, then we would expect our built environment to be better. And I thought that was very beautiful. Thank you. So we'll now I'll introduce Lisa Robertson, who's in France. She was born in Toronto and currently lives in rural France, frequently traveling to teach and lecture. And Lisa is known for working in book-length projects with subject matter that includes political themes such as gender, nation, urban space, as well as the problems of form and genre. She has written works that explore literary forms such as the pastoral, epic, and weather forecast. Her books include occasional works in 7 Walks from the Office for Soft Architecture, and her many poetry books include Debbie and Epic and The Men. Lisa will be reading passages from her recent novel, The Baudelaire Fractal. Stephen said earlier that he liked this quote that I had sent to him, Lisa, where you said, "The Baudelaire Fractal is a story about giving oneself the space to experience the world in all of its difficulty, its aesthetic richness, and its political stupidity and density. Art can give us that space. If there's a message in this book, it's art giving the space for this. Art meaning poetry, reading novels, film, all those things." Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks very much for inviting me, and to all of us for being here together. Susan, Rose, Enrique, Stephen, Annie, and Dan, Lester. This is great. We're all over the place, and that has now become interesting. This novel follows the trajectory of a young woman, a character named Hazel Brown, in the 1980s, as she's discovering how to become a writer. And at points it intersects with the 1840s and the life of Charles Baudelaire as he himself was becoming a writer. Each chapter takes place in a hotel room. So it's very spatialized in its approach to narrative. So I'll read 2 passages from the novel from 2 different chapters that I've chosen because I feel that they intersect or rhyme with Annie and Dan's work in certain ways. Well, that's the second passage. Steve Lacy's horn cuts lingeringly across a tannic landscape. I'm listening to Monk's Dream. The cold, sweet plums carry the smallest possible hint of musky leather. The toughened skin gives a little beneath the teeth before it bursts to a boozy exuberance. I've opened the old journals. Baudelaire said, art must be stupid. I know what he means. Art must be stupid as a plum, as stupid as an ankle. In that first hotel in Paris, a previously respectable but by then faded establishment near the Luxembourg Gardens and the Boulevard Saint-Michel, a place I would later recognize in a documentary photograph of the burnt out cars near the boulevard in the month of May 1968. The narrow room on the 5th floor was reached by a frail elevator used only by guests, never by the tired hostess. Each morning she would descend the steep staircase entirely obscured by a rumpled mound of used sheets. Mine was the cheapest, smallest room, which in Paris would always be on the top floor. The cot-like bed presented a challenging typography. I would shift my skinny hips to seek the sweet place beneath the wadded mattress lumps. At the foot of the bed was a narrow table, and above the table, a window looked out into the dim inner court. Street views were more expensive. This shady window communicated with a facing window of the hotel or apartment house that shared a shaded inner ventilation well used by the concierges to air their mops and rags. In keeping with the hotel's convention, I call it a court, but with no grandeur. It was more properly speaking a chute or a more spacious than usual vent. The air of this inner court was sea-like. Through this window, across the humid court, I saw a boy sitting also at his own table, a dark-haired boy in a white shirt turned turquoise by the dim light, bent a little at his typewriter. Of all stupid art, the poem is the most stupid. A nearly imperceptible flick of the mop just beneath the surface of the water, an idle flutter of the hand. Very stupid, outside all good sense and discretion, because the poem must be indiscreet or not at all. It should just trail aimlessly in the hospitable water, floating on the sea or swimming. It must be the sea, no other water. Waves, but not stormy waves, the slight rocking movement. This floating is like a hotel. Nothing interrupts sensation. The body is supported and welcomed by a gentle neutrality. Especially the sea on an overcast morning of light rain, the encompassing pleasure enveloping the skin, salt water and soft water. I will take a bath. I will write all morning in a hotel. I will lack nothing. The soft, coarse sheets wind around me. I float in the possibility of drifting unattended, the freedom of floating, no weight, no companion, just the hospitality of the encompassing element. A slight coolness is enough to bring the attention to the sensation of water on skin, of worn cotton on skin. Or perhaps in a cafe in the village in summer, the bells ringing, the irregular waves of conversation, occasional scraping of chairs on stone pavement, but mostly floating in the sea or in a hotel. The superior hospitality of the threadbare hotel, the minimal frisson of slight discomfort, as in cool water, which augments the feeling of the skin, the feeling of being only skin, punctuates the sensation of being in the minimum calmly, as in an element. The elemental hospitality of the inferior hotel, felt in the minimal, even ironical welcome, the absence of any exaggeration or luxury that would leave one in its debt, the muteness and reluctance of the clerk. This is the stupidity I crave. In the communicating window, close across the dim court, adrift also in the hospitable element, not glancing upward from his heavy black book, his serious typewriter mirroring my own, The image of the studious youth seated at his writing composed itself in my self-image. Only this morning, eating plums, consulting that old diary, which by a peculiar fate I have preserved all these decades since, do I rediscover that this first hotel was called the future. I know that he also looked outwards across the court to notice me sitting at the foot of the bed to work at my own table, frowning over my Penguin Classic, writing in the brown leather-bound and marbled volume, too heavy, too formal, too contrived for my cheap nylon traveling satchel, belated 19th century. I know this because I received his gaze and returned it. This exchange would slowly ripen in me, tenacious, voluble, through all the travels that were to follow, the movements between and within cities, from hotels to museums and libraries, from table to bath. Eventually, through a clandestine but thorough metamorphosis of my sentiments, the mutual gaze of the inner court at the Hôtel Avenir would transmute within me to become the concussive authorship. Time in water is pliable. The greenish mop scent drifting upwards weed-like, the boat-like creaking of the wooden shutters, the liquidity of the smoke of the Baudelairean boy with his sharp aquiline nose and close-cropped dark hair across the court in the communicating window, the quivering shadow in refracted light. In fact, the inside court was a sea in the way it combined so many separate things in a subtly swirling, rocking motion to make of them a single encompassing element. The shared gaze through the humid court inaugurated in me a series of concepts I could not at that time fully recognize with my lazy habits, my vague tendency to drift only on the substance of another's desire, desire found in the lazily skimmed pages of books, the desire of a boy in gardens or on boulevards or on stairwells or in seminars, as I clasped my penguin Nietzsche, worn soft by incomprehension. I had received the image of the Baudelairean boy through the medium of the moppish air of the Hotel of the Future's inner court. Such is a girl's destiny. This scant enclosure of fumy potential that later will reveal itself as the elemental core of her life. She will sit at tables eating overripe plums and burning incense, frowning a little, her sleeves rolled. No, her jacket unbuttoned at the top to show the saffron-colored neck scarf. The narrow gray inner court of the future hotel will have become her sea-like matrix. Looking back to that time is like the experience of glimpsing the incipient or dissolving activity at the borders of a room when you pass into it. An image dear to Pierre Bonnard, who painted the formal decadence of domesticity. I'm trying to do what I've never done, said the painter of those homely, askew, and yet shimmering compositions. Give the impression one has on entering a room. One sees everything and at the same time nothing. But where Bonnard's thresholds are quivering with the dissolution of pattern, always about to be crossed by their spectral, colorfully dressed occupants, much as I, paid domestic companion, had bustled from task to task, a sort of thin, vigorously animated overpainting. What I entered now in my hotel was an annulment of arbitrary conduct and designation. Here, I sensed the absence of the previous occupants, all of them strangers and so featureless. And the absence functioned as a kind of invitation to the tedium of my own inner life, a tedium akin to the boredom or spacious featurelessness of the tidy yet dusty room. Featurelessness was what I craved. This room's spiritual flatness was a matrix. I did not share Walter Benjamin's longing for the macabre bourgeois house with its glossy, large-leafed plants, its funereal slip covers and curtains and carpets, all aired and cleaned and repaired twice annually, with its collections of porcelain, crowds of good family furniture, and scent of wax. It seemed to me that what Benjamin really pined for was the grotesque invisibility of the female work that maintained this mirage, whether purchased or married. I had fled that contract. The places I stayed in were not very clean, and that was fine. They did not pertain to the recognizably female narrative of domesticity I despised. The open question of my future, of what I was to become, felt smooth and shadowy, liberated by those rooms into a textile-like anonymity, patterned with light strokes of pigment and splashes of unaccountable shade. The cool threshold vibrated with the sparseness. Then the hotel's enclosed scent opened like a grove. I, a girl, exultant, crossed into the room of sentences. This room was suddenly ornate with the written vestiges of silence. No judgment, no need, no contract, no seduction, just the free promiscuity of a disrobed mind. The room is everything that is the case. The room is everything that is time. It is entirely unexceptional. Each time, the room, this room, I fell upon it unexceptionally. I have been testing the limits exercised upon the world, or by the world, upon my girlishness. In the world that deemed me girl, what could I do with pleasure? What could I do for pleasure? I could kiss. I could go to the library. I could study garments. I could explore the possible relationships among these three things. Several of the possible relationships or combinations were more or less interesting for a while. In the room, though, there was a fourth thing and a fifth. Entirely outside servitude, I could read and I could think, finally understanding the unexceptional character of these acts. Free of all personal particularity, I read and I thought. I will call it thought, although when I placed it beside the thought of the philosophers, which I unfolded improprietously from within the creased paperbacks, there was no likeness, no identity. I was not bothered. What I felt as thought was at least my own, I believed. The room was not the world that deemed me thing, the world against which I continually bumped and scraped my awkward body as I attempted to move with guest-at elegance. It was the other world. It is the case that I fell upon this other world of the room accidentally, as falls go. The room demanded no grace. It wanted nothing from me. I fell and then I dallied. The accident of the fall, which is to say, the sudden revelation of the unexceptional character of my soul, when otherwise I had been constrained to sense myself as feminine and so exceptional, and had churlishly accepted the worldly constraint, now introduced me to a more exacting constraint, the constraint of the basic and unexceptional realization of the neutrality, the indifference, the essentially dandiacal aspect of my soul. The room was crowded at its edges with the written souls of strangers, and this was its particular comfort. I had no responsibility towards them. I could fetch nothing for them. Neither their comfort nor their pleasure were my domain. They were there because I did not care for them, perhaps. I did not need them to pay me anything. Unaware of the thoroughly comedic nature of the situation, I continued to cross into such rooms, this room, the room of my unexceptional dalliance. I say unaware, but that is not the just word. Comedy was present, but latent. The ironic burlesque of the girl reading, the girl lying diagonally across the bed, across the picture plane. This was a genre I had witnessed in the museums of my travels, and also the burlesque of the female reader's fingers inserted between the pages of the book as if to say, here, only here am I not. These gentle gestures, gestures that were barely actions, the fingers within the book, the pressure of my belly across the too soft bowing mattress, the dark fringe of my growing out hair flopping repeatedly between my gaze and the book, the upward flex of my knees and the rhythmic movement of my bare foot as I turned a page, transformed me into an image of a reader. But far from limiting the possibilities of my inner experience, the little unthought movements made by my body, which from the point of view of an observer would designate me as an image within a pictorial tradition, also brought me to the quiet certitude of this body, my odd body, as an image for thinking, an image for my own free use. Here sprung the comedy. Already my body was inside thought. The strangeness of the image, my body, the girl, her inescapable maladroitness, always leaking, bruising, stinking, lusting, originates the infraction that thought must be. For the girl is an infraction in thought. She simply needs to annotate the breach that she is as her reading destroys the purity of philosophy. The idea was hilarious, capacious, like the best burlesque. When in An American in Paris, Gene Kelly wakes up in his ship-like room, a tiny space where every furnishing folds or unfolds to become something else. When he enters the elegantly improvised choreography of grooming and beginning his day, the habitual movements of his compact yet lanky frame unfolding for his own pleasure, like a philosopher's quotidian thought, but unfolding also with the gentle artifice of the awareness of being perceived, the charm of his dance being the simultaneous refusal of and dalliance with this artifice, were the table, the bed, the basin, his perceivers. This was my sensation when I read. It was funny, and it was to become contractual. Insofar as I, or rather my body, was an image of the comedy of the girl in thought, I discovered an image to be a composite inner stance or posture. I was not a sign, therefore I wasn't a woman either. The image was a fecund entanglement, an infraction that acted within the person and also between persons and between eras also, a complex of memory, minerals, sensation, and lust. Everything that happened to me then lingered within me, latent, to next spontaneously transform the image of what I'm now saying. The reading girl, the soft action of her fingers in the text, will become philosophy, will become poetry in a passive but total infiltration.
Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful, inspiring reading. Your work seems to parallel Baudelaire's own saying, always be a poet, even in prose. So now I want to introduce Lester St. Louis. Lester is a New York City born and based composer, multi-instrumentalist, sound designer, and curator. Often working in situations of improvisation, contemporary composition, and multimedia. His work is currently rooted in practices of real-time synthesis and flow in musical performance, infrastructural and institutional development, and expansive sound design. Lester will perform utilizing cello and electronic sound to create a meta-instrument sonic palette. The artist will perform in conversation with the unique architectural spaces of Stephen Hall's X of In-House Honor T-Space Reserve. Lester.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Susan, for the introduction. I never realized how convoluted my bio is. And I think that's its best quality, actually. But thank you for inviting me and for the introduction, and to Stephen and to Annie and Daniel and to Lisa and Enrique and Rose and everyone here watching this event today. I don't know if I have much to say up front. I think I'd rather not create a possible understanding before you get to see what the piece is. All I'll say is forgive my editing, and Godspeed.
Fantastic, fantastic. Wow,
We made it.
that was amazing. Lester, what a tour de force. Man, I was
Really?
thinking, and you know, that second movement up there in the glass sphere, I thought, whoa, when you got to that right in there somewhere, I started to remember John Cage 433.
Mm.
It was 1952, and 433 was played not very far from that site in the Maverick Theater in Woodstock. And it was like an important moment. And I thought, when you were up there in that second movement in that glass sphere, I thought, that's whatever T-space is, you know, whatever we're trying to do, you know, you did it right there. I mean, you put it inside that glass sphere with whatever you're doing there. I mean, that's all original, right? I mean, you didn't write that first, did you? I mean, that was an original thing that was done right there, right?
Yeah, on the spot for the space and the space, you know?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely phenomenal, Lester. I mean, it's a phenomenal thing. I mean, it's wow. We've commissioned, I don't know, maybe out of the 10 years that we've been working, we had, I think, 5 commissions, and I never saw something so let's say, well, embedded in our mission, because you did it within the architecture, in the spirit of the architecture. I mean, it was really, I mean, also the way that building is made and all the bent wood, it's almost like a larger instrument that your instrument was inside of, you know. I mean, it's almost made the same way. So the acoustic resonance in there, I mean, I'm sure you felt it in that sphere when you were playing in there, right?
Oh yeah. When I was editing it, I was listening to all the individual things from each individual place that I recorded. I was like, why does it sound so different? Then I remembered that I'm in this like very particular space.
Round, yeah.
Microphones are capturing the sound of that space as much as the
Right.
instrument. So I was like, oh, I
Right.
can just get like the same sound for all of this. It just has to be what each thing is, you know? That's the best quality.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about Baudelaire, and at that moment of the symbolist poetry, you know, I mean, Fleur de Mal, you know, that was the beginning of all the symbolist poetry, but there was also music that paralleled Debussy, you know, and Alexander Scriabin. They paralleled that moment of breaking free from the rationality. I mean, somehow that's related to Annie and their work, Daniel and Annie's work, you know, that moment back in the Baudelaire time, that where they, in a way, it was a manifesto against rationalism and against naturalism, you know, that happened. And I feel like maybe we're in another moment in civilization where we have to bring back the soul and the spirit in ways that are not, you know, pigeonholed into some kind of rationality or romantic naturalism, you know, that it's something more free and expressive. That's what I felt you were doing there, Lester. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way to connect it to Baudelaire. I don't know. Maybe Lisa could do that.
I wonder if I can answer a little bit. There was a question that was posed earlier, and I think it kind of connects all of our work. And it was a question to us, but I think it applies equally to Lisa and Lester as well. And the question was, has your work have mental or spiritual layer? And would nature be part of it? And, you know, I think Lester was there on site, so you can kind of see it visually as you were listening to. But if I think about architecture versus space, architecture to me is exciting. Space is very spiritual. And I think, you know, in our descriptions about our work is everything about architecture without the function, it brings us back to the sort of raw space. And I feel like that when, you know, Lisa, when you read that line, that poetry must be stupid, I just, it almost made me cry. I just feel like that we had we had right to be stupid. And you recontextualized that word for me. And I think it's, in a way, I think when Lester said that you're trying to see something that doesn't exist, I wondered where you're getting at the same thing too. So, but anyway, just to directly answer the question to Anna Marie, I think the future, is there a nature part of your work? I think we have been also working on this series of work called Contained Landscape. And that idea or that description is really interesting to me, is that landscape or the nature is so wild. And as humans, we try to contain that or curate that. And so we're doing kind of a series of drawings and installation ideas about this idea of contained landscape. It seems almost oxymoron that you could do that, but I think in many ways that we see it in urban settings around us, and even just kind of our landscape around us is changing drastically because we are trying to control that aspect of nature. But anyway, I thank you both. That was just great. And Lisa's description of the in-between space from your room to that other boy's room in the hotel, and just kind of letting your mind wander into this other world just by that glimpse or that unoccupiable space that connects to people, I think it's just lovely too. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question for Lester. Lester, you said, apologies in advance for my editing. However, in this presentation we got to enjoy today, the combination of sound and image was what made the work so powerful. If you don't mind, can you speak about the editing and your decision-making behind the locations within the Exivin for each portion of the composition? The reprieve outdoors as the music goes on, and the choice to remove yourself from the image sometimes. Bravo.
Well, thank you to whoever asked that question. Yeah, I said excuse my editing because I don't think the film is particularly bad. It just kind of looks like I'm sure some early film students' first cut of their first feature film for a project or something, which I'm not necessarily qualified to say that I am. So I guess it's a bit of a combination of like half embarrassment, half modesty to say that if it looks funny, I'm not a professional at editing videos. So kind of taking some of the weight off my back. But yeah, in terms of the editing process and the choice of locations, I wish maybe Enrique or Rose or Susan could maybe pull up a full picture of the house, because it's kind of an incredible space. I think it's something, if the rest of the people who are watching this don't know about, it's an insanely one-of-a-kind building. So when Susan had sent me the images of the building a few months ago, I was like, whoa, I don't even I'm gonna be there to film myself playing music, but it would be a shame for people not to be able to see what this is. So I thought a huge aspect of what the film performance should be is also trying to highlight something about the place that I'm in sonically as much as I am in physically. So as you see here, this opening dome where you watch the last shot, it has this skylight above that has this incredible kind of light pattern, or it gives you the option of such diverse light, and all the options for light around there are so particular. And you saw it was kind of half cut, it's half dark, I'm half in the light, and I thought that was kind of great. I had another shot set up where I was far more clear, but I thought, no, I like this characteristic, the house imposes this option onto me that I think should be expressed. And it's kind of nice to come up against a limitation in that sense, so that something will impose itself onto you and you just have to make it work now, as opposed to setting up something that could be more kind of conventionally, in some sense, optimal. I thought, yeah, let's use this like skylight, which I also think is not like a totally flat one. It's got maybe some angles. Steven, you made this, right? Is that right? Is a skylight?
Yeah, but we did it. This was a project that Dimitra and I did together, which was an experimental sculpture that we called Exavin. You know, the idea of the inside is more important than the outside. Yeah. And then we experimented with a bunch of models. Actually, you can see that in this description, I think somewhere there. And then we decided to build a guest house, but we didn't have any functions. And by the way, it doesn't have any bedrooms at all. And, but it sleeps 5 comfortably, but there's no bedrooms. And they just sleep, people just sleep around in the space, I mean? So this is, and it's all geothermally heated and cooled. So it's it's almost a net zero house. And it's also, this was the 30 acres that was going to be a subdivision. And then we reformed it into a nature preserve and just built this one little tiny 915 square foot pavilion in the middle. So it's totally a piece of idealism in terms of anything architectural. Nobody would ever do this. I could never get a client to hire me to do something like this. I mean, it's like my office manager, Molly, says, Steven, you can't do that. It's a total waste. There's not enough bedrooms. You'll never rent it. But what's really interesting is it's Airbnb'd and it's booked all the time. So because people want to be in that weird space. So I think your music, I mean, we have to make that into the theme song for our whole T space. I mean, that's like an anthem. That's like an idealistic anthem for what we're trying to do. Fantastic, Lester. Awesome. Really, I'm very amazed. I mean, there were other composers, by the way, over the years that tried to do things there. There was a flute player. Susan, what was his name? The flute player?
That was in the landscape.
Oh, that was outside, Jeffrey Leppendorf. Yeah.
He tried to write something for that building. But,
it's in the landscape.
Well, okay. It was good, but Lester's is the best.
Yeah,
I won't tell anyone else.
I'm just speechless. I mean, Lester, being there while you were recording and being able to experience your concert in person from just two vantage points, once downstairs and one upstairs, what you did with the filming and the space and nature and the way that it just united, made an entirely different experience. It's just beautiful. What a surprise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I hope you saw yourself at the beginning there, Susan.
Oh, I didn't.
Like a quick second where you're in the shot, and I thought we have to keep this.
Yeah, a little portrait.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience or between artists?
I liked how you, Lester, also said that the sound was captured so differently from point to point in space. It somehow also, I think, connects with Annie's and Daniel's work of trying to get a view from their equipment, that light equipment that basically, as I understand it, records from a spot, and therefore each point you're capturing is one kind of reality, and every other spot has its own. It's almost like you can't capture reality. I think it resonates with me, and the work that all of you, the poetry included, is how do you capture a moment? It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think one thing I just recognized, a kind of through line here that I didn't necessarily realize before, but I guess all the works do take a medium specific look at perspective, or like a medium specific pointing at observation at perspective.
Yeah,
which I just realized. I have nothing great to say about it. It's just a realization.
Lisa, I have a question for you. I'm gonna just totally botch what you said, but I think you said something about that, that you, with words, you're trying to create architecture that then that provides a space for you to occupy for you alone, somewhere, something like that. Well, that's what I got out of it when I was reading your text, and I just so loved it. I think although that we do all this work in public and exhibitions and things like that, at the end it's something that you kind of do for yourself, and I think you hear that from a lot of creative people and artists that I'm making work for myself. And in some ways, Stephen kind of said that is that no client or commission you to do that kind of a project. You just have to sort of make it. Would you elaborate a little bit on your thoughts?
Well, the speaker in this novel is not me. It's a fictional narrator named Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
So the statements she makes are made within the space of the fiction, and are not necessarily what I would express in this setting. So I mean, but part of the for me, the situation of writing the novel was to represent a very young woman on the cusp of doing something, a girl who's not yet done what she needs to do, and who struggles to finding agency in a world that doesn't always welcome young female agency. So that's really what, for me, writing this novel was about. So the trope or the constraint of writing these architectures, these rooms, was a way for me. I was thinking about it in terms of Lester's work, actually. I mean, I took the descriptions of the rooms from descriptions I myself wrote when I was in my early 20s traveling, and I kept my old travel journals. So I transposed those descriptions I made and used them as a framework for a very improvisatory textual wandering. So so there is this sort of double time, but I wouldn't say that I wrote this novel for myself. I wrote it, you know, I mean, I'm 60. I wrote it from the perspective of a, you know, 22, 23-year-old girl. But I'm not that girl, and I have a public for my work, and I was aware that people would be reading it. And I think I really wrote this book for young women, actually. I strongly felt that I feel like there's never enough to address the really complex particularities, speaking of racialization, of class, of sexuality, all kinds of stuff, and wanting that stuff to cook together and you know, present something delightful where perhaps young women could see themselves. I mean, I remember traveling around trying to read Nietzsche, you know. Where could you see yourself? It didn't even seem possible. So no, I was not writing this book. I mean, of course I was writing it for myself, but I was writing it with the awareness that I really hoped that young women would find pleasure in, and would find space in it for their own experience.
I love that description that you of that character and her awareness of the neutrality of the hotel room. I think that that's a really very unusual perception that she is in receipt of this these conservative notions of her that are coming down to her gender, and she's struggling against that, and she finds comfort in the bareness of the hotel room, and then that there's this aperture that's going across the space and somewhere else. And there's just so many great observations about that I think are really important, and certainly nothing that I could ever have imagined. And it puts me in that position of appreciating that neutral space, just a drywall box where thousands of people have slept.
Yeah.
And that there's some wisdom to that, and from that you can emerge, like from a chrysalis or something. I love that view. It was really nice.
Well, for me, what that was about really was taking the Baudelairean idea of the flaneur, and this notion of this sort of neutral being moving through urban space, and inverting it into the interiority of the room. Because I think that for lots of young women, moving through urban space is not neutral. There's a hyper awareness that is present all the time because of the politics of the gaze, and because of the potential of assault, actually. So to sort of take this trope of the flaneur who feels that this sort of neutrality of ease on the street, and to flip that, to invert it, and make the banal, featureless room the sort of site of flaneurism, was one of the things I was trying to go for. Yeah. So it's sort of an inversion of Baudelaire.